are three ways to talk about God. The first is from the Bible, in the book of John. It is also carved in stone at the Universalist National Memorial Church in Washington, D.C. God is love, and he who dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. The second is a sign commonly displayed in ethical societies, including the Washington Ethical Society in Washington, D.C., which recently voted to associate with the UUA. Where people meet to seek the highest is holy ground. The third is from a 2007 movie called You Kill Me, in which a character named Tom is trying to explain the concept of a higher power as used in Alcoholics Anonymous. It says, it's got to be big, it's got to be good, and it's got to be not you. You don't have to be Christian to admire this ancient and beautiful religion and wish to learn from its wisdom. And that wisdom has a simple core. Above all else, before all else, shining out through the centuries of 20 centuries is the central teaching of Jesus. Whatever we do, we should be motivated by love and act in love. This is not the message we usually get. Sure, it's said from many pulpits and lived out in many quiet ways, and we should be grateful for those. But in the most public expressions of this very public American religion, we rarely find right or left, fundamentalist or liberal, Christian right evangelical or leftist liberation, theologian, anyone speaking as if the most important command to their soul, the imperative their God impressed upon them, was to live by love. The Christian right has narrowed its focus over the years to an almost single-minded obsession with salvation, particularly saving the individual soul. All the usual expressions of love, such as care for our families, drop by the wayside if they stand in the way of a determined march to personal reconciliation with Jesus. Love is the way to unity with God is a possibility that this branch of Christianity has neglected. Meanwhile, the Christian left has paralleled this development with a focus on saving others. The social gospel and liberation theology movements, Christian trends dear to my own heart, admittedly got so wrapped up in their own messages of service and justice that they sometimes lose sight of what lays at the core of them all. I'm the first to quote Cornel West and say that justice is what love looks like in public. But we can become so focused upon justice that we forget about the love part. Maybe we are embarrassed to talk about loving our neighbor, and it shows. Yet, when asked what is the supreme commandment, Jesus answered without hesitation, love your God with all your heart, soul, and might, and love your neighbor as yourself. Not fear God or obey God, but love God. Not serve your neighbor or save your neighbor or even help your neighbor. Just love your neighbor. Well, it's no wonder that we shy away from that because it's a tall order. What does love even look like? Doesn't it incorporate saving and serving and helping? Of course it does. But since we are so prone to do all these things out of worse motivations than love, such as the desire to look good, to be righteous, to prove ourselves better than those other people, let's set them aside for now and just ask, what might it look like when we are motivated by love? Our Universalist forebears sought to answer that question. They, like all the people sitting in Calvinist congregations in the early decades of U.S. history, heard week after week that most of us are headed for punishment, doomed to hell, and deserving of it. There is indeed a tension in religion that I think this doctrine was trying to address, a tension between love and justice. Will good be rewarded and evil punished? It sure doesn't look like that's how it got sorted out in life. Instead, as Ecclesiastes says, the rain falls on the good and bad alike, and the sun shines on all of us. Maybe a reasonable outrage at this failure of justice led to the invention of hell as a place where things would finally be fair. Punishment would be meted out there, while those most deserving would receive a reward. However, early Universalists uninvented hell. They put love first. They believed that God loves us and would not condemn us to eternal punishment. They believed that we should do what is right, not a fear of punishment, but rather out of unconditional love, such as one feels for a newborn baby. The love of God, the love of each other. That's Jesus' teaching. Right there in our Universalist ancestors, we are to live with the same Universalist love that God feels for us, all of us, the killer as well as his victims. Whoa, that needs a little explanation. Metaphorically speaking, does God Greet Sandy Hook mass murderer Adam Lanza with the same loving embrace that awaits the children Lanza murdered? Yes. Love embraces them all without reservation or distinction. And a voice in you might be crying out, as it does in me, with resisting, no, no, no. That voice, understandable though it may be, as nearly universal as it might be, is not the voice of love. Jesus, after all, has a lot of authority on this question. He was murdered too, and he knew he was being murdered. Yet among his last words were prayers for those who jeered at him while he went to his death, and they might be forgiven. Words of love under almost imaginable circumstances. Please forgive them. The universalist answer to the cry for justice, the wish for evildoing to be punished, is that hell actually does exist in this world, in the hearts of those who can't speak in the tender whispers of love, but only an angry shout of a gun. We make our own heaven and hell, and we make other people's too. That's a tough nut, and here's a possibility on an even tougher one. What must we do to live by love? Must we stop being angry or confrontational? Must we swallow our disappointment and our judgment? Who could show us what Jesus meant? Why not Jesus himself? Oh, that's interesting. Jesus was not always sweet and patient, much less cheerful. He didn't match up very well with the cliché Christianity of our culture, that hallmark hard sweetness. The soft-focused Jesus with the long, flowing, light brown locks and the ever-gentle expression, he's almost unrecognizable to anyone who spends some time reading the Gospels. The real Jesus, by which problematic term I mean the Jesus who emerges from the complex and contradictory stories told by his early biographers, was not all sweetness and light. He was impatient with the poor disciples who were so slow to understand his simplest teachings and didn't get the message even when he put it in parables and stories. He punished a poor fig tree just because it didn't bear fruit out of season for his convenience. He lost his temper and threw tables around in the temple of all places. This is the kind of person we can relate to, and I think he has a few things to teach us about love. We could have gotten a different figure. Christmas could have celebrated someone less like the baby who would grow up to be this rather angry teacher and more like, say, Santa Claus. Well, Santa only had to be cheery and generous one day of the year. The rest of us have to plug along all 365 days. So we need an exemplar who lives in the real world, who's messy, like our lives, who can get angry and dismissive and impatient and even rude at times. It might be easier for us to love St. Francis, with the birds lighting on his shoulders, or Mary, with her patient forbearance and almost complete lack of personality. It might even be easier to see them as exemplars, as perfect love. But that's not who's at the center of this story. As Zoe says in J.D. Salinger's Franny and Zoe, if God had wanted someone with St. Francis's consistently winning personality for the New Testament, he'd have picked him, and you could be sure of that. As it was, he picked the best, the smartest, the most loving, the least sentimental, the most irritable master he could have possibly picked. And he goes on to say that if that's not who we see in Jesus, then we're using prayers to Jesus as requests to live in an easy world where no one else is difficult or real. But the world is full of prickly people, downright mean people, even violent people. And oh boy, look at that. That's who we're supposed to love. That's who we are sometimes, ourselves. Good thing we have this prickly person to show us how Jesus was no saint. And yet there he was, teaching love, living love, even in the midst of his cruel, slow death. So let us clear away some of the rubbish of judgment and anger and self-righteousness and narrow political agendas that put themselves forward as the core of Christianity. Let us dismiss this gauzy, soft-focused saints. Let us move past the easy Jesus of Christmas, the sweet cooing baby, and look ahead just a few years to when he grows into an occasionally angry young man. And see how, in all of his humanness, he showed us that we too can put love at the center of our lives, our flawed, irritable, selfish lives. From the simple poor rabbi who taught wherever he went, the Jewish prophet who spoke in the long tradition of Jewish prophets speaking in temple and in love to hold their people to the highest standards, the man who never intended to found a new religion. Let us remember the simple words, love one another, but also love yourself. As RuPaul says, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love anyone else? I agree. If you're always carrying around self-hate, loathing, resentment, or any other negative feeling about yourself, you will not have room to love others. You have got to learn to love yourself. When I was young, I hated myself. I hated being a girl, I hated being fat, I hated being me. For several reasons, I could not even look in the mirror at myself. I even attempted suicide once or twice. 15 years ago, I had gastric bypass surgery and lost 200 pounds. 6 years ago, I had gender reassignment surgery. Both have made a tremendous change in my life. Both have been instrumental in how I feel about me today. But I still had to go deeper than just physical changes. I had to learn to love me so I could be my authentic self. Through prayer, time, meditation, counseling, and self-reflection, I could finally say I love me. Let me tell you about Rose. Rose was a lovely woman who at about 80 years old suffered from schizophrenia. Rose would be brought into the psychiatric unit very agitated and aggressive, but within a day or so, with the proper medications, she'd be sweet as a peach. Rose had many long conversations about God and love and heaven, and she was rock solid in her Baptist faith. During one conversation, Rose expressed her concern about all the people who were interviewing and examining her. She was tired of being treated like a lab rat, but she was afraid to talk to the doctors. The nurse tried to reassure her that they were there to help her, and suggested that she be honest with them in answering their questions. Just be yourself, the nurse told her, and they'll take good care of you. Rose's response to this sage advice was a priceless gem. Be yourself, she said. Of course I've got to be myself. Everybody else is already taken. Frank Forster Church IV was a leading UU minister, author, and theologian. He was a senior minister of the UU Church of All Souls in New York City. He often said, be who you are. This is, he admits, the hardest task of all. Simply put, he tells us to be who you are is not to fake your existence. He writes that each of us is unique with unique flaws and gifts. The world doesn't owe us a living, we owe the world a living, our very own. In his book, Love and Death, Forrest Church tells of the opportunity he had as the son of the U.S. Senator Frank Church to enter politics while he was still working on his doctorate in theology. After running his father's presidential primary campaign in Nebraska, the son was ready to jump into his father's footsteps and run for public office himself. Fortunately, he listened to his father's advice to live his own life, not the life his father led. And in doing so, writes the younger Church, I found my calling. I answered a call that was mine and not someone else's. He goes on to tell us that envy and other skills, looks, or gifts, rather than embracing your own nature and call, is to fail in two respects. It's trying unsuccessfully to be who we aren't. We fail to become who we are. Be who you are, as Rose pointed out, is rather an inane concept. Of course you are who you are. You are who you are because everyone else is already taken. But if it's so simple, then why do we spend so much of our lives trying to be who we're not? Trying to be like someone else, or trying to be that someone else thinks, or wants, or makes us to believe we should be. To be who we are, who we were born to be, is no easy task. Consider for a moment our childhood and how we learn most of what we come to know. Although our intellect develops the ability to discern and debate, our most basic form of learning is emulation. Or to put it in simplest terms, copying. Like a giant game of follow the leader, we grow up watching what others do and observing their outcomes. If we like what we see, we try to do the same, in hopes of gaining a similar result. From a very early age, we're wired to be like rather than simply to be. For some of us, this message was explicit. Why can't you be more like your brother, your sister, your cousin, fill in the blank? Our media convinces us that to be accepted or happy or successful, we need to act a certain way. Drive a certain car, marry a member of the opposite sex. There's a reason that the Rolling Stones song, Satisfaction, is going strong after 45 years. It speaks in part to the futility of trying to be the person that someone else thinks we should be. When I'm watching my TV and that man comes on to tell me how white my shirts can be, but he can't be a man because he doesn't smoke the same cigarettes as me, I try and I try, but I can't get no satisfaction. Role models are invaluable to us on both a societal and an individual level. They serve to inspire us and to motivate us to consider what is possible. And there are certain traits or aspects of others that we should try to emulate. I grew up when Superman and Batman were all the rage on TV, and who could argue that we shouldn't work for truth, justice, and the American way? The danger comes, of course, when we try not to just be like our role models, but to become them. This is a recipe for disaster, a formula for failure. Neither you nor I will ever be more powerful than a locomotive or capable of leaping tall buildings in a single bound. So we try to be just like Mike. Remember that Michael Jordan commercial? We are destined for disappointment. Even if it's not superheroes or pro athletes we try to model ourselves after. In Forrest Church's case, he came close to making the mistake of trying to be like his father, the powerful Senator Frank Church of Idaho. Sometimes, the influences that exert their power over us are more subtle than this. We grew up in a family of achievers, and although nothing is explicitly stated, we incorporate the message that much is expected of us. A parent's well-intentioned action sends a signal of what they hope for us. And we receive the gesture, consciously or subconsciously, as a mandate. If you hear things like, "You're so good in math, you should be a scientist," enough times as a child, you're likely to believe you should become a scientist, and that your passion for dance or music or social work is misplaced. By the same token, if over and over again you hear the message you'll never amount to anything, that too becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The forces that dictate against being who we are powerful in many. To be who we are can be like swimming upstream against a strong current of expectations and what I call the tyranny of the shoulds. And if these forces aren't enough to defeat us, to be who we were made to be, all the more challenging by our lack of self-knowledge and self-awareness. Perhaps the greatest challenge to living in Forrest Church's mandate is to be who we are and discovering just who and what that is. Living in 21st century America, most of us are blessed with lives of comfort and relative ease. And so we can ask the question, who am I and what do I want to be when I grow up? Many of us spend years of our lives and thousands of dollars in therapy to discover the answer to these questions. And in finding them, some of us follow our bliss, to use Joseph Campbell's terms, while others, constrained by factors such as fear, family, or finances, remain living a life that is not our own until our days run out. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, author and educator Parker Palmer tells of his journey of discovering his true self. He calls the true self the self planted in us by the God who made us in God's own image. The self that wants nothing more, nothing less than for us to be who we are created to be. To embark on the journey to discover this God-given self takes courage and commitment. It's a risky business. It requires us to shed the masks and the costumes that populate our closets, to strip down our naked selves and take a close look in the mirror. There we are called to see ourselves, and perhaps more challenging yet, to claim ourselves, warts and all. Palmer puts it this way: I know myself to be a person of weakness and strength, liability and giftedness, darkness and light. I now know that to be a whole means to reject none of it, but to embrace all of it. This might all seem like terribly narcissistic navel-gazing, but it is imperative that we discover our own true selves and claim our wholeness in order to fulfill that other mandate we received from Forrest Church to do what we can. When we fail to discover our true selves, when we cling to the personality that has nothing more to do than wearing a mask or the fulfillment of the expectations of others, it is easy to simply remain victims of our own condition. We are disempowered puppets, actors playing out a script not of our own making. But when we do the hard work of discovering our true and authentic selves, of claiming our whole lives, we are called to live into those lives. Embracing one's wholeness, Parker Palmer writes, makes life more demanding, because once you do that, you must live your whole life. You must, in the words of Forrest Church, be who you are. The good news is that it's never too late. It's never too late to start the journey of self-discovery, of shedding the skin that we've worn since our birth that has, like an ill-fitting suit, never felt quite right. May Sorton is testament to this fact. When she wrote the words, "Now there is time, and time is young," she was 83 years old. It was at this chronologically advanced age that she discovered her true self and finally felt her own weight in density. To be who we are is to offer the world the greatest gift we can give, to invest our lives and all that we do with sincerity, authenticity, and deep commitment leads us into relationships with other authentic selves. And in entering into those relationships that are sacred in the true meaning of that word, we cannot help but bring our collective power to bear against the forces of injustice, hatred, and oppression. Our collective wholeness will, by definition, heal the world. I would like to wrap up this sermon series by telling you one more story about Forest Church. Forrest had what I consider to be a very public spiritual practice that he engaged in every week. Each Sunday he would conclude his sermon with the words, "Amen, I love you. And may God bless you all." Just weeks before his death, he explained to his successor, Reverend Galen Gundrich, why he said, "I love you" at the end of his sermons. "When I say I love you from the pulpit," he told Galen, "something connects. I get connected to the congregation, and they get connected to each other. It's almost like, for a moment at least, we are part of each other, of something larger than ourselves. It's the human form of love divine," as Blake put it. And besides, Church went on, "someone once told me that I'm the only person in her life who ever says I love you. She comes to church to hear someone say that she matters." We all yearn to be told that we matter, that our true selves are worthy of love and capable of loving. In our common humanity, we share our vulnerabilities and our sensitivities, and we offer them up here on the altar of hope. I pray today that we may find within us each and every day to want what we have, to do what we can, and to be who we are. Amen. I love you. God bless you all.